Tamara Myles joins me today on the podcast, an author, speaker, researcher, and positive psychology instructor at the University of Pennsylvania. Tamara provides peak productivity leadership training and consulting for clients like Microsoft, Anytime Fitness, and Unilever. She's the author of the book, The Secret to Peak Productivity, a simple guide to reaching your personal best, and an international keynote speaker. Tamara helps leaders design systems and creates cultures that make work meaningful and enable individuals and teams to thrive. I have asked Tamara to come on today to talk to me a little bit more about leadership, but also about the book, The Secret to Peak Productivity, a simple guide to reaching your personal best. So without further ado, Tamara, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Absolutely. I know I said quite a bit there about your background, but maybe if we can start off with a little bit with you sharing about who you are.
Sure. I guess I help people. I help leaders be their best and bring out the best in their people. So I have a real passion for, helping leaders create organizations where individuals and teams can thrive, because we spend so much of our time at work. And so shouldn't that time be meaningful to us? Shouldn't we feel good about the work that we're doing and the colleagues that we work with? And so that's kind of, what I do. And I grew up in Brazil. So I hail from Brazil. I'm a third culture kid. I grew up in Brazil and the United States. So, multicultural exposure. And I ended up moving to the United States during college and have lived here ever since.
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing that. You have done some really inspirational and impactful work, and you talk about a very important topic, which is leadership. And you mentioned some of it there as well, just in terms of helping people enjoy what they do, and bring out the best in individuals as well through proper top quality leadership. I guess the loaded question to you would be, what does leadership mean to you?
I think a lot about that question because, I think there's so many answers to that. In a one-word answer to that would be influence, right? I think leadership is about influence, and how can you influence people to reach the outcomes that you need to drive, right? That you need as a leader to drive for the businesses, but also that to help them reach the outcomes that they want for their own personal success. And so in one word, it would be influence. And I think there's a couple different ways to approach it. There's transactional leadership, which is really about, having a vision, having goals, helping people achieve those goals. So very outcome focused. But there's also transformational leadership, which is, I think, where you can bring, a lot of the human skills, soft skills, influence into not only just driving outcomes, but how you do that, how you get people inspired to achieve their best. And so I think leadership is complex, and I don't think it comes only from hierarchy or a position in the organization. I mean, that's the easy leadership role, is the one that you're given by a title, but anyone in any role can be a leader, right? Anyone can have influence on others, whether they manage them or they just work alongside them.
You said a very important thing there, which is around everybody in an organization can have an element of leadership or have an element of influence that ultimately contributes to leadership. And you obviously work with some very large organizations across the world. Like, I'm curious to know what your opinion is on how would organizations and how would leaders foster a culture of developing that type of influence with individuals that want to be in leadership, but are not necessarily in a leadership role?
In the research that I do a lot of research around meaningful work and how leaders can make work meaningful. And one of the practices that comes up as very, very strongly correlated to the experience of meaningful work at an individual level is the idea of really seeing potential in people, seeing strengths, looking for what's strong with people instead of just what's wrong, and then developing and investing in developing that potential. And I think that if an organization really wants to build a culture of leadership, not everyone has the same strengths. So really being intentional about identifying people's individual strengths and playing to that, giving them opportunities to show and grow those strengths. I mean, that's been shown to increase engagement, increase productivity, increase well-being, right? But also it drives outcomes for the organizations. And so I think that's a really simple, not easy, but simple practice that leaders can foster, is like developing people's potentials. We all, as humans, are driven towards mastery, right? And self-determination theory shows that one of our biggest pillars of motivation is this idea of mastery and excellence. We all want to get better at something. We all want to be seen as people who have potential, and we all want leaders to invest in that potential.
That's very powerful. I'm just capturing so much in there that you just described, just in terms of that individuality and that approach of really understanding what drives each individual, and also that element of mastery that can be different. And there's some commonalities, but can be different amongst every individual. And a key component of actual leadership is really understanding that, defining that, and then exercising that to the best, to bring out the best in people, right? But when you talk to leaders that are responsible for large organizations, and not just individuals that are in individual contributing roles, but rather responsible for leaders across an organization, like how do you advise that type of influence and that type of impact for those leaders that have responsibility across a very large organization with people from all over the world, maybe from different regions, and with multiple different leaders above them as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and a complex, problem to solve, right? So what I have seen leaders do well in big, complex organizations is to not only focus on the individual, but also focus on systems, right? Because yes, individuals are driven to mastery, and yes, people are motivated. People want to show up and do their best work, but also they operate in contexts and in complex systems. And so it is important to develop individuals and to give them opportunities to reach and stretch their potential. But also, it is really important to create the context where those things can happen. And so from a culture standpoint, and like taking a big zoom out approach, how can leaders create the right systems for people to thrive in? And so I think it trickles down to, yes, it is the individual level, and managers, you look at the complex hierarchies, and each person has a role, because an organization is made up of individuals and teams. And so all of those have a role, but also, if they're not operating in a system that is caring for everyone, that is giving opportunities for people to reach that potential, I guess it doesn't always work. And some of the practices, I guess, or the tangible things that leaders can do that I've seen be very successful is provide autonomy. Autonomy is huge, again, for motivation. It's part of self-determination theory as well. So it's relatedness, autonomy, and mastery are the three big drivers of human motivation. And it's also a pillar of meaningful work. When people feel like they have autonomy to do what they believe, to execute the tasks that they need, that they know they need to execute in the way that they feel is best, they do really great work. And so providing autonomy is really important, to create that context where people can thrive. So that's just one practice that leaders can do. Another one is to be really clear on the organization's purpose, right? But not only just as far as like it being words on the wall,
right?
The purpose, but also the values. And also, what do those values mean? What behaviors do these values translate to? And how do they look in the organization? So these big picture decisions, because what happens is when you have very strong stated purpose, when you have a set of values, but also what the behaviors associated with those values are, it gives people direction on how to operate. Okay, this is integrity, and this is one of our valued behaviors, and this is how integrity shows up here. And this is, okay, this is the task I need to do. I have autonomy, but I have to do it bounded within these values. So it's not a free-for-all autonomy. It's autonomy bounded by the values of the organization. So these are some powerful things leaders can do, is zoom out and really focus on the organization's values, and not just espousing words on the walls, but like tangible, actionable. How do they live here?
Yeah, and I feel like, it's a key thing that you mentioned that it actually ties into what you talked about earlier on, right? It's that ability to create that culture of trust and autonomy, and that component of, clear direction, just in terms of stability, right? Just in terms of the organization's missions, goals, and values as well, that really creates that element of influence that you talked about earlier on. And I love how you brought it all together there. In your opinion, though, what are some of the biggest mistakes that leaders make today?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen through the pandemic, unfortunately, is this idea of micromanaging, right? When we all had to go remote,
Right.
people really thought that it couldn't be done, right? Oh, it would never work. It was like such a long-term future of work thing that nobody imagined it could be done. And then it had to be done. And people in general, I mean, there's conflicting data and there's both ends of the spectrum, but there is a large number of people that actually thrived with the working from home. They were more productive. They got more focused work done. They reported having a little more balance. Yes, there's the other end of the spectrum too, for sure. But and these were the organizations whose leaders felt really comfortable with letting people have the autonomy to, maybe they had to homeschool their kids during work hours and get their work done a little later. But as long as the work was getting done, they had confidence in their people. They were checking in. They asked how people were doing. They showed that they cared. On the other hand, I think, there were lots of reports of people who were using software to micromanage the time that people were spending doing work and all that. So that, I think, is a huge failure of leadership, not trusting your people to rise to the occasion. There's research on students with young kids, this concept called the zone of proximal development, which is stretching people just enough, giving them something that's just hard enough that they can do with support. So you raise the expectation, not to an unreachable level, but to a level that's high enough above where they are now that they can reach with support. And that helps people grow and thrive. And it's the same for adults. We all can do just a little bit more than we do now. We want to do things that are harder, that help us grow and learn, but with support. And so the leaders who did that well and trusted their people helped people really, perform at their best and thrive. And I think micromanaging is a big mistake. And I think, another big mistake that unfortunately I'm seeing a lot of is leaders who are not supporting their people's whole self, the well-being, that are just transactional and focused on only the outcomes of the work and forgetting that there's a human person doing that work, right? That are not really intentionally fostering those connections. That one of the biggest losses we've had throughout the pandemic and working from home is our connections with our networks, with our colleagues. People miss seeing each other, miss being together for small wins and celebrations and brainstorming and creativity. And leaders that have really intentionally continued to foster the relationships have really helped their employees feel connected and cared for. And the ones who haven't have seen rising burnout numbers and turnover.
So it's really that element of creating the culture of trust and autonomy, and then not just focusing on results, but rather self-care, well-being, and combining those two things, it will organically, I believe, drive actual results and outcomes as well for organizations, I would imagine, right? I want to talk a little bit about the book, Tamara. Maybe share with me a little bit about it. What is the ultimate peak of productivity, and tell us a little bit about the book.
Sure. So this book I wrote, oh gosh, almost 10 years ago now, and it is a model for personal productivity, and it's all based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it's a hierarchical approach to productivity based on my work with hundreds of clients that I was coaching to improve their own personal productivity. And it has 5 levels. So it starts with very external, tangible, basic level, physical organization. So having systems in place to help you be productive. The reason why it starts there, it's much easier to change external things and organize, files and calendars and find systems than it is to change behavior, right? Behavior change is very hard. So then it builds from there, and it create systems for electronic organization. Then the third level is really time management, which is what most people think about when they think of productivity.
Right.
And in that
Right.
level, right, at that level is all about, I use what I developed a system I call the 3 Ps of time management, which is all about planning, prioritizing, and then performing. And performing is about the things that we all know keep us from performing at our best, like procrastination and multitasking and interruptions and all of that. Level 4 gets us to aligning the activities that we do every day to our goals, right? And many time management and productivity systems start there by defining the goals and then aligning what you do with your goals. The reason why mine does not start there, and it's actually one of the last levels, is that in my personal experience with clients, they were so overwhelmed by just like reacting to things and trying to get things done that they didn't have the mental bandwidth to really be thoughtful about their goals. And so it was just like one more thing on their to-do list. And by creating the space with the other levels first, I have found that they can be much more intentional and purposeful about the goals they create and how they spend their time. And then finally, the top level where Maslow's self-actualization would be is a level that I call possibility, which is one of my favorite words. But that's about really thinking of possibilities beyond what you even imagined were possible when you were drowning in a reactive mode, just trying to catch up like a hamster in a wheel. Once you go through this process and the system and the 4 levels, on average, the clients I worked with have about 2 more hours of time per week. And so how can you intentionally spend that time and create possibilities for yourself that you never thought possible, instead of just frittering the time away and letting it fill up with meaningless activities? And so that was the book that I wrote 10 years ago. And I am excited to be writing another book now, which takes us beyond productivity, beyond the personal productivity, to really how leaders can make work meaningful. So I'm writing that book now with my colleague and research partner, Wes Adams, and that hopefully will be, I don't have a release date yet, but currently working on that. And so it's very exciting. And that is a culmination of the research that we've done with organizations like Microsoft, Marriott, Zappos. We've done research with them for the past couple of years on how leaders intentionally make work meaningful. And what happens when leaders make work meaningful is that productivity increases, engagement increases, burnout decreases, all these outcomes that leaders are constantly trying to manage and react to kind of drive from the experience of meaningful work. So really excited to be working on that now.
I can't wait for that. I look forward to the announcement coming up as well. I love the way you articulated the real value of the book. And even though it might be 10 years ago, but I love the amount of impact that it has, because from the organizations that you've been involved with, I get the opportunity to have proper visibility into the overall impact that productivity actually has on the book, and also from a leadership by influence perspective, just in terms of creating that space, that culture, that autonomy, the prioritization of personality, self-care, well-being, etc., and how that ultimately contributes to the overall impact and the overall outcome and results for the organization. You're doing some incredible work, Tamara. Of course, you're making quite a bit of an impact, and you're helping leaders on a regular basis. Like, when it's all said and done, after the second and the third and the fourth and however many books you would have written, what is it that you want to be known for?
Oh, that is a great question. And simple and difficult one to answer. But I think, if I were to be known for one thing, I would say, like, at the simplest level, I want to have helped people. I want to be somebody who inspired someone to make a meaningful change in the way they led. And because of that, their people thrived, not only from their own personal well-being, but their business also thrived, right? Because we know that meaning and money, purpose and profit are so connected. And so if I can be known for helping leaders help their businesses and their people, I would be thrilled.
That's incredible, and I have no doubt that you will. And what a place to leave it. Thank you so much. You've been such an incredible guest to have on the show, and I'm so glad you took the time to talk to me. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you.